The invitation was heavy, ivory-colored with gold-embossed lettering. It carried the scent of expensive cologne and privilege. Inside was the invitation I'd been anticipating yet dreading. You are cordially invited to the Blackwood family gathering. Location, the Blackwood Manor. Attire, summer elegant. Date, August 15th. I gazed at the words for several minutes, then carefully returned the invitation to its envelope and set it beside the others I had received throughout the years. I had never attended, not once, but this year was different. This year I had a purpose for appearing. You see, for most of my life, I was the overlooked one at family gatherings. Or rather, the one they pretended to overlook. The girl wearing second-hand clothes at Christmas dinner. The woman who arrived without a partner at family celebrations. The one who leased her apartment, worked exhausting hours, and lacked a proper profession, according to Aunt Patricia, because proper professions didn't involve faded jeans and midnight sessions at municipal planning meetings. But nobody ever inquired about those meetings. Nobody ever questioned what I accomplished with my limited resources, because to them, I was simply Maya, the child of the unsuccessful Blackwood, the one who never achieved anything. And they reminded me of that constantly. I arrived at the manor 30 minutes behind schedule deliberately, long enough for the champagne to begin flowing, yet early enough to still make an entrance. The driveway remained pebbled, just as it had been during our childhood, though the vehicles had certainly transformed. BMWs, Autos, a Jaguar. I parked my modest sedan down the lane and walked the remainder of the distance. They were all present, toasting glasses, relaxing beneath cream-colored umbrellas, flawless tans, linen outfits, laughter that always carried an undertone of rivalry. Maya, someone exclaimed with theatrical surprise. It was Aunt Patricia. Her diamond earrings glinted in the sunlight. Oh, darling, we weren't certain you'd attend. Didn't think you could get away from work. I smiled courteously. Managed to squeeze it in. Still working for that small consulting business? She asked, gesturing vaguely. Still at it, I answered. I didn't mention my company's name. Not yet. Uncle Robert raised his flute as I passed. Look who's finally shown up. The prodigal niece returns. We were beginning to think you were allergic to family gatherings. Just wanted to ensure I was truly missed, I replied, keeping my tone light. It was all superficial. Insincere embraces, air kisses. 2 bright smiles. But beneath it, the judgment persisted. Whispered remarks, eyes examining me from head to toe. Noticing the plain sandals. The simple navy dress. The unadorned bun in my hair. And then came the moment. It always did. Like clockwork. We were seated for lunch at elongated picnic tables beneath pavilions. The wine flowed abundantly. And then my cousin Taylor, who had recently purchased a 5-bedroom in the suburbs, leaned in with that saccharine voice I recalled so vividly from high school. So, Maya, she said, just loudly enough for the table to hear. Are you still renting? I smiled and sipped my sparkling water. I am. Another cousin laughed. You're what? 34 now? You've got to escape that cycle eventually. Absolutely, Taylor added, adjusting her platinum bracelet. It's time to mature and build some equity. Someone else chimed in. We were just discussing how volatile the housing market is. I mean, if you don't already own property, you're basically stranded. I surveyed the table. They were all so at ease, so self-assured, so confident. I was still the same Maya they remembered. I remained silent momentarily. Let the silence stretch just enough to create discomfort. Then I leaned forward, still smiling. You're right, I said. It is a challenging market. More difficult than ever to afford property. Especially if you're attempting to buy in this neighborhood. Several nodded in agreement. That's why I decided to pursue a different approach, I continued. Instead of purchasing a house, I bought the complex. They blinked. What complex? Aunt Patricia asked, frowning. I placed my napkin on the table, rose unhurriedly, and turned to observe the row of luxury condominiums just across the lawn. The Blackwood Terraces, recently renovated, popular among affluent tenants. That one, I said, pointing. Laughter ceased. Forks paused midair. Someone choked on a sip of wine. You mean you own it? Taylor's voice cracked, eyes widening. I nodded. Every unit. The LLC operates under my firm. Obsidian Capital acquired it 3 years ago, discreetly. Silence descended like thunder. And in that moment, I wasn't the poor cousin. I wasn't the tenant. I wasn't nobody. I was the one who possessed the keys. And they had no idea what was coming next. For a prolonged moment, nobody spoke. The breeze rustled through the pavilion, brushing over half-empty glasses of wine and untouched portions of quiche. Faces once flushed with laughter now stared at me with vacant, blinking confusion. It was Patricia who eventually broke the silence, forcing out a brittle laugh. Oh, Maya, don't be absurd. You're always so dry with your humor. I tilted my head. I'm not joking. Uncle Robert leaned forward, one eyebrow arched as if inspecting an unusual specimen under glass. You're claiming you own Blackwood Terraces? His tone was measured, skeptical, as if he was waiting for me to admit I was bluffing. I do, I replied calmly. Through my firm. Obsidian Capital purchased the property in 2020. During the market downturn, renovated every unit, upgraded plumbing, insulation, security systems, and employed local contractors. Their expressions shifted. You're saying you bought it? Cousin Taylor asked, voice strained. That entire development? I nodded, taking a deliberate sip of my water. That's correct. That's impossible, she said, almost to herself. You were what? Still leasing a studio and working part-time? 1 bedroom, I corrected. And I was never part-time. I simply didn't broadcast what I was accomplishing. Not everything worth building requires fanfare. Taylor scoffed, but the edge of panic was becoming evident. They were attempting to calculate mentally, retracing years they hadn't paid attention to, assembling pieces they never thought to inquire about. They remembered the surface, my second-hand jackets, my small apartment, the car with the faded paint. But they had never asked what I did between 7 and 7 every day. The truth was, after my breakup at 28, I had nothing remaining except my name, a modest savings account, and a concept. While they whispered behind my back about how I'd failed at relationships and settled for mediocrity, I invested everything I possessed into understanding real estate. I enrolled in every course I could afford, volunteered for community development committees, shadowed investors, learned from property managers and zoning officials. By 30, I had scraped together enough for my first property, a dilapidated fourplex nobody else wanted. I renovated it on a tight budget, occupied 1 unit, leased the others, and reinvested every dollar of profit. I haven't had a vacation in 7 years. I didn't need one, didn't upgrade my wardrobe unless absolutely necessary, while they shared vacation photos in Santorini and tagged themselves at exclusive restaurants. I was inspecting construction sites in steel-toed boots. They had no idea, and they never asked. Why wouldn't you tell us? Aunt Patricia asked, now more accusatory than curious. I met her gaze. Because the moment I started doing something you didn't anticipate, it would have become a competition, a joke, a target. That's not true, she snapped. Isn't it? I looked around the table. You ridiculed me for renting, for not finding a partner. You said I was squandering my potential. Not one of you ever inquired what I was working toward. Well, Uncle Robert cleared his throat. We just assumed. Exactly, I said. You assumed, and I allowed it. Because building in silence was safer than building under your scrutiny. Taylor's lips were compressed so tightly they appeared bloodless. You're saying we pay you rent? I'm saying I'm your landlord. Indirectly, through my firm's management company. A slow, profound realization rippled across the table. Their rent payments, their lease renewals, their maintenance requests, all quietly arriving at the desk of the cousin they'd spent a decade underestimating. Christ, Taylor muttered, and then, as if on cue, the accusations began. This is deception, Aunt Patricia huffed. You concealed this from us. It's business, I said. And you never looked closely enough to notice it. Taylor slammed her glass down. What are you planning? Raise our rent? Evict us? I leaned back in my chair. Why would I do that? You're reliable tenants. Generally punctual. Minimal damage. I prefer to maintain stable occupancy. Then what's the purpose of this? She demanded. You wanted to humiliate us? No, I said softly. I wanted to remind you that not every narrative you construct about someone is accurate. Sometimes the person you dismiss most is creating something you can't even perceive. They didn't know how to respond. For once, they were silent. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the trees and the gathering concluded, Taylor cornered me near the garden. Why now? She asked. Her tone wasn't venomous anymore. Just bewildered. I regarded her. Truly regarded her for the first time in many years. Because I needed to confirm I wasn't intimidated by any of you anymore, I said. And perhaps I thought it was time you saw me clearly. She blinked, swallowed visibly, and nodded without speaking. As I walked away, I heard Aunt Patricia whisper to someone. That girl is not who we believed she was. She was correct. And they were just beginning to realize how little they actually knew about the girl they once mocked. I didn't sleep much that night. After departing the gathering, I took the scenic route back to my car, shoes in hand, allowing the pebbles to press into my bare feet. Not as punishment, just to feel something authentic. Something grounding. The same way I used to walk construction sites, letting the earth remind me that foundations always precede finishes. The truth is, I hadn't attended the gathering for validation. I had gone for closure. But closure, I was discovering, wasn't as tidy as a dramatic revelation or a single shocked expression. Sometimes it arrived in waves, long after the champagne was depleted and the music had ended. Long after silence enveloped you, dense and heavy with everything that remained unspoken. When I arrived home, I sat at my compact dining table, the one I'd kept even after upgrading my living space. I retrieved an old journal. Tucked between the pages was a folded note in my father's handwriting. He wrote it the week I abandoned graduate school. The week I chose real estate seminars over academic ambition. Maya, this isn't the path we envisioned for you. We're concerned. Real estate is unpredictable. Academia is a career. Be careful not to squander your potential. I didn't blame him. Not really. In this family, worth is measured by credentials, degrees, titles, the illusion of stability. My father had dedicated his life trying to fit that archetype. Establishing connections, raising children who appeared successful on paper. He had never been taught that creating something from nothing with your own determination could be a heritage worth anything. The Monday following the gathering, I met with my team at Obsidian Capital. My assistant, Alex, gave me a prolonged look before placing my coffee beside my computer. Are you all right? He asked. Still processing? I am, I admitted. But yes, I'm fine. He smirked. Well, if it helps, the residents of Blackwood Terraces just received the latest tenant satisfaction survey results. We're at 93%. Looks like your unassuming life is quite successful. I smiled, appreciative of the levity. But there was something else. Something lingering at the periphery of my thoughts. A detail I hadn't wanted to acknowledge aloud. They resided in my building. That was accurate. But they didn't simply live there by coincidence. I had selected that property deliberately 3 years earlier when it became available for purchase. It was just another entry on a listing sheet. But when I saw the address, my stomach clenched. It was where Aunt Patricia had relocated after Uncle Robert's financial setbacks, where Taylor moved after her husband's startup collapsed, where my parents had quietly downsized after Dad's retirement fund diminished. They hadn't informed me. Of course, they never told me anything. I only discovered it during a tenant background check, and that was when I made the decision. I purchased it not to trap them or embarrass them, but to protect them. They had no idea. But rent increases in that area were displacing long-time residents. I didn't want that to happen to the people I still, despite everything, considered family. I stabilized the rents, extended lease options, quietly absorbed maintenance costs, and I never mentioned it. That afternoon, I received an email from Taylor. Just one line, can we talk? I debated ignoring it, but curiosity prevailed. I sent her a meeting link and suggested a time. She joined the video call 5 minutes early. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup. Not the polished, curated version of herself she typically presented. I owe you an apology, she said, before I could even speak. I wasn't expecting one, I replied. Well, you deserve it nonetheless. We sat in silence momentarily. Awkward but not hostile. I researched you, she admitted. Obsidian's portfolio. Your projects? I had no idea. No one did, I said. That was intentional. She nodded. I suppose I just assumed you were failing because you weren't flaunting anything. I tilted my head. That's the problem with assumptions. They don't require evidence, just complacency. She looked away, embarrassed. I'm not requesting anything, she said. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. All of it. That meant more than I anticipated. But before I could thank her, she added something that caught me unprepared. Do you remember the summer I got that fellowship at the architecture firm in Chicago? She asked. Yes. Grandma mentioned it constantly. Well, I saw your design portfolio that year. They were superior to mine. But you never submitted them. Why? I sighed. Because everyone had already determined who I was. And back then, I wasn't resilient enough to challenge it. She swallowed hard. You are now. And perhaps I was. After we concluded the call, I reclined and gazed out my office window. Below, the city pulsed with quiet vitality, apartment windows illuminated, sidewalks bustling with commuters and pets and shopping bags. All these years, I thought success meant escaping the people who underestimated me. But now I wondered if the true power was in quietly transforming the world they thought I could never access. Not for revenge, but for redemption. Not just theirs. Mine. 2 weeks passed after the gathering, but the aftermath persisted. I began receiving unexpected messages, some cautious, others awkwardly warm, a thumbs-up emoji from Uncle Robert, a forwarded article on real estate trends from Cousin Nathan, who hadn't spoken to me in years. And then there was my father's voicemail, hesitant and slightly breathless. Hi, Maya. Your mother and I were wondering if you'd like to join us for dinner. Nothing elaborate. Just us. We'd love to chat. It was the first invitation I'd received from them in nearly a year. I almost declined, but curiosity and perhaps hope nudged me toward acceptance. Their home was smaller than the one I'd grown up in, a modest, single-level residence with flower beds that had clearly once been magnificent. My father opened the door with a tentative smile, and my mother stood behind him, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. Smells like roasted lamb, I said softly. My mother blinked, surprised I remembered. Your favorite, she said. We sat at the old maple table. The one they'd managed to preserve from the larger house. They asked polite questions about my work. I provided measured responses. Then my mother leaned in and said something that surprised me. Why didn't you tell us you were struggling? I set my fork down. Because I wasn't. She looked perplexed. But you lived so modestly. I lived intentionally, I corrected. I was building something quietly because I knew if I made even one error, the whispers would intensify. She flinched at that. Perhaps she recalled the things she had permitted, the remarks during family gatherings, the sidelong glances, the small, constant erosion of confidence. You could have asked, I said gently. You could have called, but you didn't want the version of me that didn't include a graduate degree, or an engagement, or a luxury home. You wanted the appearance, not the person. My father exhaled. You're right. I looked up, startled. We failed you in that regard, he continued. We stopped seeing you for who you were becoming and only saw what you hadn't yet accomplished. That was our mistake. It wasn't precisely an apology, but it was something. And it resonated more deeply than I expected. The next day, I received a call from the property manager of Blackwood Terraces. Maya, she said, we have a situation with one of your tenants. What's happening? Unit 4B, Patricia. Her rent check was rejected again. Third time in 6 months. She's significantly behind. I paused. Has she commented? She's mortified. She's been avoiding us. Of course she was. Patricia would rather endure hardship than request my assistance. Especially now. Tell her she's covered for the next 6 months, I said quietly. Say it's a temporary financial assistance program. No need to involve her dignity. The manager paused. Are you certain? I'm not here to penalize them. I'm here to protect the property and perhaps to break a pattern. Later that evening, I retrieved the box I kept tucked in the back of my wardrobe. Inside were fragments of my early plans, hand-sketched blueprints, spreadsheets annotated with margin notes, newspaper clippings of affordable housing initiatives I'd advocated for at city councils. No one had viewed these before. No one had asked to. I found an old photograph of me in a hard hat, beaming beside a weathered triplex on the day I finalized my first property purchase. I remember thinking then that success would feel like recognition, that eventually everyone who doubted me would acknowledge me. But now, years later, I realized I never craved recognition. I wanted impact, legacy, something that transcended status symbols. A few days later, Taylor reached out again, this time in person. She appeared at my office, tentative, holding a coffee and a notebook. I've been reflecting, she said. I want to understand what you do, how you accomplish it. I raised an eyebrow. You want to become a landlord? No, she said. I want to become someone who builds like you. Someone with purpose. It was the first time I'd heard her speak without attempting to overshadow someone. I nodded slowly. All right. Come in next Monday. I'll show you the fundamentals. Her eyes widened. Really? Certainly, I said, but no shortcuts. You'll begin from the foundation, exactly as I did. She smiled. Agreed. That night, I walked the perimeter surrounding Blackwood Terraces. The lights in each window flickered with lives in motion. Families preparing dinner. Teenagers playing music too loudly. Dogs barking at passers-by. This place used to be merely a number on a spreadsheet. Now it was part of something greater. I'd safeguarded the people who once ridiculed me. Not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become like them. Vindictive. Superficial. Consumed by ego. The best revenge isn't always dominance. Sometimes it's serenity. Sometimes it's standing confidently before people who never believed you'd succeed, and choosing not to diminish them in return. By the time Monday arrived, the office hummed with more than routine energy. Taylor appeared 10 minutes early. Notebook in hand, dressed in sensible shoes and a simple, tailored blazer. No designer labels. No overpowering perfume. Just a nervous sincerity I hadn't witnessed from her since we were children playing in our grandmother's garden. Before vanity consumed our family like an invasive vine. I brought coffee, she said, raising 2 cups like a peace offering. I smiled. Thanks. Let's begin. I didn't start her with presentations or market analysis. Instead, I handed her a stack of tenant feedback reports from our last 4 acquisitions. Read these, I said. Every single comment. Understand what people are truly expressing. Not just about the units, but about their lives. She blinked. No spreadsheets? Not yet. First, you learn who you're serving. It was the opposite of how she'd been taught. In our family, people were secondary to status. Profit was the deity they worshipped. And anything not worth displaying on social media was deemed insignificant. She didn't protest, though. Just nodded, sat down and began reading. By the end of the week, she was transformed. Still Taylor. Still quick-witted and proud, but more grounded, contemplative. She had questions, genuine ones about community planning, zoning regulations, rent stabilization, sustainable development. One afternoon, I discovered her examining the urban development map pinned to my wall. You know, she said quietly, when you told us you owned the building, I thought you merely wanted to flaunt it. I remained silent, allowing her to continue. But then I observed how you managed it. No exorbitant increases. No evictions. You didn't attempt to demonstrate superiority. You simply continued your work. I turned to her. Want to know a secret? She regarded me. I could have raised your rents legally. The market would have supported it, but I didn't. Because people deserve stability, not just marble countertops and rooftop pools. She swallowed, then asked, do you believe people like me can evolve? I met her eyes. That depends. Are you willing to unlearn everything that made you feel entitled? She nodded slowly. I think I've already begun. A week later, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at an urban development conference. They sought someone to discuss ethical metropolitan growth, specifically women-led enterprises investing in inclusive housing. For the first time, my name wouldn't be concealed behind an LLC. It would be prominently featured. I hesitated before accepting. Part of me had grown so accustomed to operating discreetly that stepping into visibility felt unnatural. Vulnerable. But another part, the part that once sat at the children's table while my cousins joked about property losers, was prepared. Ready to demonstrate that creating something authentic didn't require permission. Only determination. The day of the conference, I wore a tailored charcoal dress, minimal accessories, and my favorite worn flats. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I no longer needed to verify anything. I spoke for 15 minutes, shared my journey, the developments, the neighborhoods, the residents. I didn't exaggerate, didn't boast. Just conveyed the truth about what it meant to build from the periphery. The applause was subdued initially. Then it grew enthusiastic. Genuine. Afterward, someone from the City Planning Commission approached me. We'd like to collaborate with you, she said. The city needs more developers like you. Ones who prioritize people, not just returns. I thanked her, heart racing. This wasn't merely about proving my family wrong anymore. This was more significant. When I returned home, there was a letter waiting at my doorstep, handwritten with a familiar looping script. It was from my father. Maya, I watched the recording of your presentation tonight. I wept halfway through. I realize now I didn't just underestimate you. I didn't perceive you. Not truly. I was too focused on who I thought you should be to appreciate who you were becoming. Your mother and I are proud. We always should have been. Love, Dad. I sat on the steps and reread it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the same box that once contained only blueprints and doubt. Now it held something else. Affirmation. Closure. A beginning. A few days later, I walked the corridors of Blackwood Terraces. It appeared like any other tranquil evening. Lights illuminated. Distant conversation. The aroma of cooking through partially open windows. But something felt different. Unit 4B's door opened as I passed. Aunt Patricia stood there, her voice uncertain. Maya. I stopped. Hello. She cleared her throat. I heard what you arranged with the rent. With everything. I didn't want you to lose your home, I said. She hesitated. Then, for the first time in my life, she spoke the words I never anticipated. Thank you, and I apologize for how we treated you. I nodded once. Thank you for expressing that. As I turned to leave, she added, your grandmother would be proud. You know that, don't you? I paused momentarily. I envisioned her sitting on her old wicker chair. Sketching concepts for community centers no one funded. Quietly believing in the importance of shelter. Not showmanship. I hope so, I said softly. Then I walked back into the evening. One chapter was concluding, but something far more powerful was just beginning. The Willow Street Community Garden buzzed with gentle music and clinking glasses. String lights hung between trees, gently swaying in the evening breeze. Children chased each other between planter boxes. The aroma of grilled vegetables, freshly baked bread and laughter filled the atmosphere. It was our first resident appreciation event. An idea I'd conceived years ago when I was still drafting dreams on the backs of receipts. A celebration of community, not contracts. Of people, not property lines. Taylor stood beside me, distributing raffle tickets to residents with a warm smile I barely recognized. "She's changed," Alex remarked beside me, observing her from across the courtyard. "Never thought I'd witness that." "Me neither," I replied. "But sometimes people just need a different perspective." He handed me a folder. "City just approved our next venture, Westview Revitalization. It's yours if you're interested." I accepted the folder without examining its contents. "I am, but not now. Tonight isn't about the next project. It's about honoring this one." He smiled and nodded, then wandered off to join a group of residents near the refreshment table. Toward the end of the evening, my parents arrived. They didn't come dressed in their typical formal manner. No heels, no blazer, just casual attire and genuine smiles and a plate of homemade pastries my mother insisted on bringing herself. "Are you certain we belong here?" my father joked lightly, offering me one. "You do now," I said. He surveyed the scene, taking it in. "You created this?" "I did," I nodded. "But I didn't accomplish it alone. Every individual here contributed. They trusted me even when no one else did." My mother reached out and touched my arm. "We recognize that now, and we regret it took us this long." I no longer required the apology, but hearing it still resonated. Some injuries don't need to be reopened. They just need to be acknowledged. Later that evening, I stood on the small platform we'd arranged beneath a canopy of lights. The conversation quieted as I stepped up with a microphone in one hand and a notebook in the other. "I just want to express my gratitude," I began. "Not just for attending tonight, but for believing in this place, for being part of something I once only envisioned." I scanned the crowd. Familiar faces smiled back. Residents, staff, neighbors, even family. There was a time, not long ago, when I was ridiculed for not owning property, when the concept of success was restricted to square footage and price tags. But true success is more subdued. It manifests in repaired roofs, secure hallways, neighbors who recognize each other's names. I paused, then added, "I used to believe legacy was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you establish. Brick by brick. Lease by lease. Story by story." The applause that followed wasn't deafening. It was gentle, respectful, authentic. And that was more than sufficient. As the event concluded, I noticed Aunt Patricia sitting beside Mrs. Jimenez from 2A, laughing over an anecdote about squirrels and the compost bins. Two women who'd never encountered each other before tonight now connected over something small and strangely unifying. Taylor stood at the beverage station explaining resident-first policies to a curious city council member with unexpected assurance. And my mother, my refined, dignified mother, was dancing barefoot on the grass with a child from the building across the street. They were evolving gradually, imperfectly, but evolving nonetheless. A few days later, I returned to my old apartment. I hadn't resided there in over a year, but I maintained the space not for sentiment, but for perspective. It reminded me of where I originated and why I commenced it all. I sat on the floor, no furniture necessary, and opened my notebook. On the first page I wrote, "What I construct must benefit people, not egos. Legacy isn't in the name of the building, but in the lives within it." Then I closed the notebook, leaned back against the cool wall, and exhaled deeply. I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong. I set out to prove something to myself, that compassion is not weakness. That resilience doesn't need to announce itself. That quiet endeavor matters, especially when no one is applauding. And ultimately, I didn't need them to notice me. I needed to be me. The girl they underestimated. She became the woman they now rely upon.